So how can we communicate to people not just where they are, but who they are? And sometimes the who they are that they have lost, but if they would be able to recover, something would be more clearer with how they understand things, how they process things.
Welcome to the Lausanne Movement Podcast, where we have a passion to accelerate global mission together. If you like today's episode, won't you take a moment to rate and review our podcast and subscribe? That way you won't miss a thing. And now, for today's interview. Well, Ray, welcome to the podcast. It's really great to have you with us today.
Kamusta, Jason? That's a Filipino word for how are you? And hello everyone as well. And it's a joy to be here.
Thank you for that. I just shared with Ray that similar greeting in South Africa is how's it? And so Ray's going to remember that one when he comes to South Africa. A very warm welcome to you, Ray. I'm excited about the prospect of today's interview. We plan to cover loads of ground from here on out. Living faithfully as believers in our localized context. We're going to speak about colonial captivity, impact of demographic shifts on the expression of global Christianity, and hopefully land with some practical applications for our listeners and for some of the organizations that we work for. So yeah, I'm keen to see where the conversation goes and takes us today. To kick us off, Ray, you wear many hats, blending theology and education and a passion for cultural engagement. Could you share a bit with our podcast audience about the work that you do? And more specifically, could you give us a bit of your backstory? What inspired you and set you on this path in terms of the work that you do and the passions that you have?
Wow. So I hope we don't scare people away with the many things that I'm really into. But it's true. I mean, I'm different things to different people. But at the end of the day, I would always like to remind myself and also tell people that at the very heart of who I am is an artist. I used to do visual arts, but then down the line, I chose the written word, or I went into literature. So in the Philippines, I chose to be a writer. So I write books. The term that they call it is a creative nonfiction. Yeah. So of course, I do a lot of things, but I think that is where my core would be. That God gave me a craft that when I do it, it gives me energy rather than takes away things from me. Yeah, but also that gift also led me to very exciting things. And one of those, my current role is with the World Evangelical Alliance. So I now lead the theological commission of the Alliance. And also I now edit the theological digest called Theological News, which is exciting for me because both are in a way, I look at those two roles as a creative work. I mean, because we would talk about this in a while, but I think we are in a new era and a lot of imagination has to come in. Yeah. I'm also with Tear Fund. I'm coordinating their theological education network in East and Southeast Asia. And basically, that means connecting professors, teachers who are passionate about missions work, about whole life missions, what it means to engage people and their communities and everything that is around them. And I think I have to mention this because I think I'm also a full-time dad. I mean, I have two daughters, a 6-year-old and a growing 1-year-old. And I had an amazing wife who puts order into the scatterbrain artists that I have, which I really so grateful to the Lord for giving me this wonderful family that brings a bit of like, how do you say that? Still point when I have many ideas flying, and then I go to that center, and that became my still point. Oh, one last thing, if you will allow me, I really love coffee. I mean, and coffee from different parts of the world. And when people sometimes ask me, Ray, what is it that you really do? And I will say, I drink coffee with people, and then in the midst of our conversation, I think of who they could be drinking coffee with in the future.
Oh, that's wonderful, Ray. Thank you for sharing that. I love that you added in the fact that you are a father as well. I think that is, when you speak about whole life missions or whole life discipleship, our family really forms like a large part of that. So you have a passion for helping people understand the importance of living out their faith within their local and cultural contexts. Sounds like a lot of what you're doing with Tear Fund is connected to that. How did your own personal experiences shape that conviction and that passion within you?
That's a nice question, really, because it always remind me how the Lord sort of a way steered me into the direction where I am now. So aside from the arts, I fell in love with theology. And so I studied theology and read a lot about amazing stuff, wonderful, deep thinkers. And then I realized, I mean, these things, only a tiny, tiny fraction of the population, I mean, in my country and maybe in other countries as well, would even dare go and venture and try to understand these things. And so I realized theology is wonderful, but how could normal people like engage with these deep thoughts? And then one time I met Rene Padilla, Carlos Rene Padilla, from a theologian from South America. And he told me that he also was into theology. And then he told me that down the line, theology, instead of becoming being a servant that helps people grow, sometimes it becomes a barrier. And then at that moment, I think I made a commitment. I said, okay, I would like to get a theology to where people are and bring these amazing deep conversations from these amazing books into where people are, and at the same time appreciate the conversations happening among people who they may not be using high lofty words, but for sure they're very much serious about what their faith means. And so that set me from theology. I crossed disciplines. I realized I needed to study something that will allow me to do just that. So I shifted to communication. And so I studied communications because I wanted to bridge the gap, sort of. And when I studied communications, I stumbled upon culture. And I realized that a big part of how we understand, how we communicate, how we try to process things is culture. And the more deeper I get into culture, I realize that culture is not just an aid. Culture is basically an identity. It's something that people wear on their sleeves, sometimes unaware. For sometimes, culture can be something that is repressed as well, I realize. And for some people, not just repressed, something that was taken from them in a way. And that realization led me to more and more explore. So, how can we communicate to people not just where they are, but who they are? And sometimes the who they are that they have lost. But if they would be able to recover, something would be more clearer with how they understand things, how they process things. And of course, I mean, if we're taking up missions, I mean, a lot of how the gospel could get across would be right at the heart of that process. Yeah. So I think that's what set me off, I mean, into this journey.
You know, as you were speaking, I could tell that you have a heart of an artist as you were thinking about theology, as you spoke about communication, how that led you into thinking about culture and identity. You could really pick up the creative trend going through all of those steps that you took. And even just the nuance that you brought to this idea of a repressed identity and how we communicate that in missions, I think is so vitally important. And I think that connects with the next question that we want to dive into, which has got to do with this whole idea of colonial captivity, which may sound like a bit of a trigger word for those who are listening, but this is a passion of yours. And part of that passion is for you to help bring about a healing to deep colonial wounds. So before people jump off the podcast in protest, could you just elaborate for us what you mean when you're speaking about colonial captivity? You've written about this, spoken about this, what it looks like in today's context. We're speaking about a globalized context here, and perhaps share a story or an example of where you've witnessed this and you've seen it addressed in an effective way.
That's really a big word. And to me, it's not just a big word. I mean, it's a big hole. And that is something that is very personal to me, because when I was in this adventure that God set me on to help people communicate, understand a bit more deeper about who God is, who they are, what the Bible says. And then it was along the way that I realized that I myself needed a bit of processing about what I thought I understand. I have no words to describe it really until there was one moment that it confronted me in the face. If you allow me to share just a short story, I had a mentor, so she gave me a book. In pure vernacular, it was like, the deep vernacular kind of literature, right? It is my local language, and then she asked me to read it in 1 week, okay? But then I came back to her in a month, and then she asked, "Whoa, what took you so long? That is your language. You must be able to have read that a bit faster." And then I told her, "Of course, I want to be able to answer you in case you give a quiz, so I gotta get everything right and correct." And then she told me, "My son, do you want me to explain a bit what's happening to you when you were reading that book?" I said, "Yeah." And she told me, "When you were reading that book, you were not really reading the words. You can read the words, but you code switch and translate it back to English. And then you process it, then you code switch, and then you again read the book in the local language." As if a curtain was taken away from my eyes and said, "Yeah, I think that's what's happening to me." And then I asked, "Why it's so?" My mentor was an anthropologist, so she know a bit of about this stuff. And then she told me, "Because my son, I think all your concepts in your mind are all labeled in English. Because from when you were small, from kindergarten up to your graduate school, university, even seminary, everything you know was labeled in English. So it means you can read your local language, you can even speak it, but you don't think on it." I said, "Oh, wow." I said, "Yeah, I think that's what's happening to me." I was processing that when I went home, and then I realized this big hole in me, which I realized that, oh my goodness, I mean, I cannot think in my own language. So everything I know about the faith, about my spirituality, all of those things were labeled for me by another people, from another culture, from another language. And that's not bad. But I thought, what would it feel? How would it look like if I can gain like a primary understanding of that experience? And then it was only later on that I gained the term, or how do you say it? I was able to name what was that and what took me so long. And that was colonial mentality. I mean, I was not aware that my mind has been held captive by the rich and long colonial history that we thought was already over. But then it dawned on me, oh my goodness, I mean, it's very much alive and kicking. And so that sent me off into a journey towards recovering who I am as a Filipino, who I am as a person with my own language and way of thinking. And I realized that I mentioned that I was digging deeper into culture a while ago. I realized that it was way, way deeper than that. And the more I dig deep, I think the more I know and can explain who I am now. And also, the more I get to appreciate what I have become in the process. And coming to terms with that colonial captivity and accepting the need for undoing it, I think that was what it means to like experience a healing of a wound. It's a recognition that there's a deep colonial wound inside you, that you need to seek the Spirit of God to come and really allow to process it and find healing. Of course, it will have marks, right? But being able to move from a position of pure victimized to a position of seeing how God has been at work all throughout your life, and moving positively towards the future. I think that is what it means to bring healing. From my own healing, what the Lord allowed me to do was to write books in my language. What God gave into my life was, okay, you want to write, then write something in your own language. And I said, yeah, I think it is not just so that I could connect and help with my generation, but also it became like a therapy for me. Writing in my own language, and with my generation, it means also writing in mixed languages. So in the Philippines, we have, I think in other countries, they would also have this kind of phenomenon when in the local language mixed with English, right? So we call it Taglish or conversational Tagalog. And writing a series of books on that allowed me to overcome that colonial mentality and get a glimpse of what it means to think from my own local culture, from my own local language, and from my own point of reference. It's like a mental shift. I could not say that I have like liberated myself completely or 100%. I said there would be scars and marks, but the more I realize now, it's a journey. Now we have a fancy term for that. A lot of people are talking about decoloniality, decolonizing. But even before those words came up and become popular in Facebook, I mean, I was already, the Lord has been leading me towards that kind of a journey. Sorry for a bit of long story, but that what really has transformed this a journey of mine into this kind of a ministry.
Nurad, I really appreciate the way that you have brought this conversation about. Just sharing from your own deep experience, there are many people who are listening to this that I know it would resonate with them, you know, the same experience of reading and thinking in English and trying to translate that into your own language. So thank you for setting the stage for us. You know, I've just experienced in my own life when God is doing a deep work in me, and I'm trying to communicate that from that depth and that well and that space, it can be very difficult to communicate why what I'm sharing and what's going on within me is so vitally important, not only for me, but for the person who's listening. So I'd be curious to hear, you know, as God has been doing this work within you, how have you been able to communicate that to others within your own context? You know, as you're speaking about colonial captivity, as you're speaking about the need for healing, you know, I could imagine some people looking at you and saying, Ray, what are you going on about? You know, just go continue with your theology and write your books. And others might be resonating. How did you communicate that? And what reaction did you get? And perhaps what examples of, like, did people experience the same revelation as you? And what has been the process for them in terms of their own healing?
Maybe because I'm also a pastor. So one of the privilege of being a pastor is you get to have that opportunity to deliver like a homily. I mean, every once in a while, right? A day in, that's Sunday in, Sunday out. And I think people have noticed a remarkable shift in the way I try to share a message. Whereas in the past, I would be used to quoting a lot of people. I mean, the more quotations you have, or the more Hebrew and Greek that you put in, I mean, the more solid your preaching sounds like, right? But over the years, I think I have shifted to really looking into how the scriptures, for example, come into full color when it engages our culture in the Philippines, and then I try to also express it in the local language. So instead of parsing Greek, I'm parsing our vernacular. And in that a few times, I mean, I've seen how the local language is able to bring about the original meaning of the Hebrew and the Greek in ways that sometimes it's hard to do in English. It's not that English is not a good language. It's not just there are things that English brings about really really well, but for some things you need other languages to put some more color or texture to what the scriptures are saying. So immediately the people around me, I mean, we have young pastors in the church, and they were saying that they could not preach in English or straight English. I said that's perfectly okay, and that you don't have to. And maybe the depth would come into how you're able to articulate God's word more meaningfully using the language that we have. And this is not an issue of translation, because translation is, I would say, I would not say it's easy. It's more conventional. I mean, people would often, when they think of culture, they think of, oh, you just need to translate things. Okay. But what I'm trying to communicate here is not translation. This is trying to think from the context. You're not translating anything, but you're trying to unearth, you're trying to draw from a particular context and try to understand from that vantage point how the gospel or God's word is speaking. So I could say it may include translation, but it's beyond translation. And I've spoken to a lot of people who said, oh yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if we think of it this way, I mean, yeah, I think that's what Jesus meant. And those aha moments of people that I have coffee with, I think that for me translates my own personal experience into something like, oh, so this is not something that's personal. This is ministry, because it allows people to find confidence and liberation to be who they are as a person.
You know, Ray, as you were speaking, I was just thinking actually a lot about Jesus and perhaps his own upbringing within Judea. Think of how, you know, Judah was taken over by the Greeks and then the Romans, and he grew up in a space where he was Hebrew speaking, but spoke Arabic and Greek, and the linguistic complexity and the cultural complexity that he must have grown up in. From your perspective, how does scripture inform our understanding of culture and faith and mission, particularly within the majority world, in these spaces where there might be deep colonial wounds that need to be healed? From your perspective, what scripture informs that and you believe is an anchor for us as we dive into this conversation?
I always get excited when this question is asked, because for me, I've studied scriptures, I've studied theology for quite some years, but I just glossed over it. But then when I had that experience of undoing of colonial captivity, then when I started to read the book of Acts again, something just screamed out of the page. Like, for example, the Pentecost moment, and when the Spirit of God came into the apostles, and then they speak in languages, and the people heard them in their own language. That was the Pentecost moment, and that is significant because it means that these people do not need to understand Hebrew to be able to hear what God has to tell them. And I think that in the book of Acts, that jumpstart a series of similar episodes that actually is telling people that, you know, the gospel is now crossing boundaries. The gospel is now crossing cultures. And by the time that when God allowed the early church to be scattered, and they literally scattered from Judea, Samaria, and then from the church in Jerusalem, and then you now start to have pockets of churches, Christian communities who are not Jewish speaking, who don't know Moses, who don't know the Pentateuch, right? And they inhabit a different world from the Roman Empire. They are Greek speaking. Their mythologies are different. Not the burning bush. They would have Hercules and Zeus. And so when the early church started to ask, okay, what do we do with, we have new people, new means non-Jewish people who don't know everything about being the chosen people of God. What do we do with them? And in the Jerusalem Council, I think that was very remarkable story when they say, okay, maybe a handful of things that you need to keep in mind, but aside from that, practically, you don't need to be a Jew. I mean, you don't need to follow the 1,000 plus commandments that Moses wanted the Jewish people to follow. you're actually there to figure out what it means to follow Jesus. And when I realized that, and then I look at Paul's letters, I realized the huge burden that was put on his shoulder, because epistle after epistle, literally Paul was asking questions about food, about what to drink, about what to wear, who to marry, should I stay single, question about society and politics. And so, because it was up to the shoulders of Apostle Paul to help these new communities in a different context, different culture, different social location, to start helping them to figure out, okay, what it means to be a follower of Jesus in this particular space and time and community. And I think that for us is an ongoing story. The book of Acts did not end with the Greek-speaking believers. Eventually, it reached the Filipino-speaking believers, the different nations and countries in the world today. And I think the same question remains. What does it mean to follow Jesus in this very particular context? And sometimes we sort of stop with one particular working out of what it means to follow Jesus in one particular context, and we use that as a template for everyone. And that may include the experience of the early church, which are basically working within a very specific culture from within the Roman Empire. Sometimes we can even use that as a template. What if what Apostle Paul was saying was that, hey guys, here's the template of how to live Christian life? What if what he was giving was, okay guys, here's the open door. The door is practically open. Now you have to figure it out and be faithful as you can in wherever context that you find yourselves in.
I think that's so applicable to what's happening in the world today. There's this idea of a template being used to say, this is what's right, this is what's acceptable, you got to fit into this mold. And we are now living in a time that is quite unique from the past 100 years. And the fact that, and most of the listeners on this podcast will know this, that there's been a global shift in the demographics of Christianity. The shift has moved from the West into the majority world, Latin America, Africa, Asia. The majority of Christians are living within these regions and not the global West, where a lot of the templates we've received has come from those spaces. With these demographic shifts that have happened within the majority world, how do you imagine, or perhaps reimagine, what global Christianity looks like? But particularly as I speak to you as a theologian, as a pastor, how will this impact, and how should this impact and change the way that we understand theology, interact with discipleship, community, and mission? Very loaded question, and I can keep unpacking it a little bit, but I think you get what I mean in the sense of there is this shift. We've received this template, but the world is globalized now. It's not the same world that we received those templates in. And so could you speak into that for a moment?
When you have a template, it's useful in a sense because you start with something, right? And then you could improve upon it, innovate it, and do something with it. That template could, of course, people reared in the digital world. I mean, everything copy-paste is just the easy way out. You just copy-paste everything, right? If it is good, just copy-paste it. And copy-paste theology, copy-paste missiology, copy-paste discipleship is just the easier way to go about it. And digital technology, in a way, facilitates that easy copy-pasting of things because things now are more accessible to everyone. I mean, what you do there in South Africa, it could very easily get across Manila, right? But just the same thing, now that we are made aware of how the world is different and huge and close as well. And so we realize that K-pop is a word on its own. I mean, there's a way to enjoy K-pop in the same way that we don't compare it with Hollywood pop, right? I mean, which one is better? It's just they are different things. And cultures are also like that. And what I'm thinking is that now that they say that 70 to 80% of Christians now live in the majority world, Asia, Africa, South America. And so I think a huge responsibility, especially leaders from those regions, need to take up is to how to help their own people to work something from their own context. I mean, copy pasting can get us somewhere, but if this continues to be where the gospel is, and all the more that people need to think seriously about it. Because, I mean, one scholar of world Christianity, Professor Andrew Wall said, what is very interesting about Christianity is, unlike other religions where they started, that's still their center. But with regards to Christianity, it's like a living organism. It moves from one geographical center to the other. And when it moves, it really moves. If we think of the movement of Christianity that way, then where the Spirit of God is working now in these regions in the majority world, then the responsibility of what, similar to what Apostle Paul did, it's already knocking on this door. Yeah, it's good that during the Jerusalem Council, you have these reflections from the Jewish religious history. It's good, just copy paste it. But Apostle Paul ended up trying to think, because the context is different, that the people are different. And I think the same goes now for Christianity in the majority world. We have resources. We are not starting from scratch because we are part of this global, not just global, historical. There's a long line of history, long line of Christian reflections. But we don't need to stop from there. That's actually the starting point of where our living out of the faith becomes even more exciting at this point in time. And sometimes when I think about it, I'm just mesmerized. Because when I talk to people from South America, when I was in Colombia, for example, when I was in Nepal, things that I take for granted as someone who is a Filipino or knows a lot of American theology, when I went there, just don't work that way. I could not assume. And the insights that they have brought arising from their own point of reference is something that I myself would have no way of thinking it, because I am not from that. I do not have it. And hearing from them just expands the way I understand about how God is moving into this world.
Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing a bit of those perspectives. I love that idea of that we're not just part of a global church, but part of a historical church. And part of our responsibility is to identify where we are in that point of history and how to bring the gospel faithfully into our own context and our own space. So I'd imagine that there's church leaders who are listening to this, they're resonating with what you're saying. As a pastor, you can perhaps speak into their context. They're saying, I am where I am. I'm in this specific space in the world. Perhaps like you, my church understanding is Americanized, or it's, from wherever they've received the gospel. What practical steps could you give them as you're speaking into helping them take steps to apply the gospel into their own context, to be able to contextualize it for their own space? Imagine that you're sitting at a conference. This is the task that you've been given, to help them take practical steps, but do it in a few minutes. What steps can church leaders take, mission leaders take in terms of applying this?
For some of these new centers, or where Christianity is taking root now, are actually not new. They are just re-emerging. Christianity in Africa was older than Christianity in Europe or in the United States. And as I learned from an African scholar, Kwame Bediako, right? Just being able to remember history way beyond what we are taught in seminary is a good step. Because for example, your church is not the first church in that land. There must be like places like India. I mean, the Christianity in India is way older. I mean, straight from St. Thomas. And sometimes being able to remember history is a good way forward. We have a saying here in the Philippines, in English, one who does not look back towards, or one who does not remember the past, will not be able to navigate the future. And for many pastors, local leaders, anchoring ourselves into what has happened in the past is always a good step backward, but it's a step backward because it allows you to move also forward. So in sometimes being able to remember and sometimes recognize that you have a deep Christian history, and this is just a re-emergence of what was before. I think that's something that is within reach because it is within that particular area or locality as well. It was just lost, as I mentioned a while ago. Sometimes your identity was lost, and you have to recover it. Still going back to that theme.
What words of encouragement or advice would you offer someone striving to live out their faith authentically within their culture and context?
They say that the language you really live on is the language that you dream in. And we are in an exciting moment in church, in the life of the church, of what God is doing to his people in the world. And it would be great to dream new dreams, right? I think it would be really not just great, but a sweeter to be able to dream the familiar pictures that you have in your home, in your homeland, and dream in your own language as well, the familiar sounds, songs, and music that you hear from you were a boy, and reconnect those dreams with who you were and who you can be.
Rhea, once again, I can see that artist coming out of you, connected with your pastoral heart. Thank you for that. Listen, we're going to have to start bringing this podcast to a close. I mentioned in the beginning that I was excited to see where this conversation would take us. And I'm not disappointed. I feel like we've landed in a sweet space. We've spoken a lot about the past. We've spoken a lot about the present. I'd like for a moment, as we bring this to a close, chat a bit about the future. As you look to the future, are there any particular projects or areas of research that you're excited about? And how can our listeners support or get involved in these initiatives?
What really gets me excited in the different roles that I have is that I'm able to connect different voices from different parts of the world. And what I'm working on is for these different voices, not just to be confident of how they sound, but for these voices to hear each other. Not necessarily to copy each other, but to hear each other and be encouraged by what they hear. And not just encouraged, be inspired to even be more confident of being who they are, because they could learn and share from people across the world. And that's one thing that I'm working on. I mean, I'm working on a series of publications and webinars as well with the WEA and other partners as well, and linking these voices across the world and becoming friends. I would not forget how John Stott, for example, and Rene Padilla made Lausanne a really rich space because they were able to connect, they were able to hear each other, and they were able to understand each other and learn from each other. And those are the kind of things that really gets me excited in what I do now.
And where can our listeners get a hold of some of those resources that you just mentioned?
A good place to start is the Theological News, which is a quarterly digest by the World Evangelical Alliance. We also have a series of podcasts with the KLC, with the Kirby Lying Center, and you can Google that up. Series we're working on is what does it mean to be evangelical today, the majority world? What does an evangelical look like in Ethiopia, for example?
That's really good. And where can people find you if they want to get hold of you or contact you?
I rant actively in Facebook. They can find me, but I belong to the old school of bloggers. I still maintain my Tumblr account. It's called Halfment Exegesis ray.tumblr.com, and I still do a lot of those blogging stuff.
Wonderful. I'm going to make sure to put that in the podcast notes, the show notes for those who are interested. Ray, as we bring this to a close, any final thoughts that you want to leave with us as you think about what we've spoken about? Anything you want to leave with our podcast audience?
Sure thing. I mean, in a table now that we now have a global table of Christianity, right, before us. And it would be great if that table becomes a feast. Different kinds of things in there and different kind of coffee. We all enjoy coffee, right? But in being able to enjoy coffee from Kenya, coffee from Sumatra, coffee from Colombia, I mean, and recognizing and respecting how those things can be different and still bring a common source of choice for each one of us. I think that's a good metaphor for how we could enjoy Christianity in this exciting new frontier that God is opening up to us.
That's so good. I'm a sucker for coffee. So I love the way that we're ending up this podcast. It's making me thirsty. So, Ray, thank you so much. I hope that you are blessed as you go ahead with your ministry. For our podcast audience, thank you for joining us today. Blessings to everyone. Until next week.